Good evening, everybody. And breaking tonight, growing calls for Democratic Congressman John Conyers to step down over sexual harassment allegations. And taxpayers are demanding to know who is responsible for the outrageous congressional slush fund used by senators and congressmen to hide both their identities and acts of sexual molestation and abuses. We'll have that report for you here tonight. Also tonight, dramatic new video that captures a North Korean soldier's daring defection. That video and details on his escape from the land of Kim Jong-un. And 3 U.S. sailors remain missing tonight after a Navy plane crashed into the sea southeast of Okinawa. It has been a bad year for the Navy's 7th Fleet, which has had 2 fatal accidents in Asian waters this year, leaving 17 sailors dead. We'll have much more on that here tonight. Our top story, growing pressure on the longest-serving congressman to resign. Democrat John Conyers of Michigan faces an ethics investigation now after 2 women accused the 88-year-old of sexual misconduct. And the scandal has raised concerns about how taxpayer money are being used for hush money. Fox News Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel with our report.
Lou, good evening. The hometown newspaper for Congressman John Conyers says he must resign for his public betrayal. An editorial in the Detroit Free Press says about Conyers, quote, his documented use of taxpayer dollars to bury allegations of sexual harassment goes too far. The editorial says Conyers using money from his office budget in violation of congressional ethics rules is the kind of behavior that can never be tolerated in a public official. The House Ethics Committee has said it will investigate. The latest revelation comes from a lawsuit filed by a former scheduler for Conyers who says she dealt with unwanted touching and advances repeatedly and daily. Late today, New York Democrat Congresswoman Kathleen Rice called on Conyers to resign. And other House Democrats, Raul Grijalva and Gregory Meeks, have called for Conyers to step down from being the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. The Conyers matter has led to questions about how staffers on Capitol Hill file complaints. The process is a staffer has 180 days after an alleged incident to give written notice to the Office of Compliance. Then there's a counseling process that typically lasts another 30 days, basically being advised of their rights. Then it's on to mediation for roughly another 30 days. That's when the staffer's office gets notified. If mediation doesn't work, the accuser may ask for an administrative hearing or file a case in federal civil court. The allegation and the case remain confidential in almost all cases. A sexual harassment attorney who has handled cases involving congressional staffers says it is tough on accusers.
Well, it's generally untenable. When I've represented multiple staffers who've been sexually harassed by members, it's just they can't stay there. There's no way to move your desk to the other office so you don't have to work with this individual, and they have to leave.
The Congressional Office of Compliance says 17 million taxpayer dollars have been used to settle 264 claims over 20 years, not all for sexual harassment. There's now a push to make the process a lot more transparent, to identify offenders and have the settlement money come out of their own pockets. Fox News has learned the Congressional Black Caucus has scheduled a 2-hour sexual harassment training for its members next Thursday. Lou?
Mike, thank you very much. Mike Emanuel reporting. Sexual harassment allegations also at the forefront of the hotly contested Alabama Senate race. The latest polls show Roy Moore still has a big chance of winning, but rival Democrat Doug Jones has changed tactics and is now seizing on the scandal. Fox News correspondent Jonathan Seri in Birmingham, Alabama, with our report.
I'm applying for a job. Roy Moore is applying for a job. He can't seem to hold one.
Democrat Doug Jones mocked his Republican opponent, who was twice removed from the Alabama Supreme Court for refusing to follow federal court rulings on same-sex marriage and public display of the Ten Commandments. Speaking at a town hall forum in Huntsville, Jones praised Ronald Reagan's ability to reach across the aisle and criticized doctrinaire Republicans of today.
They're the same ones, by the way, that are simply saying, oh, pay no attention to the allegations against Roy Moore. He's a Republican. By God, we'll vote for him anyway. That is wrong, people. That is wrong.
Moore was invited but did not attend the town hall.
I never dated underage women, and I never engaged in sexual misconduct with anybody.
The Republican has been granting interviews to sympathetic commentators, using these friendly forums to deny the allegations. He told talk show host Scott Beeson he's considering legal action.
We're talking about the Washington Post. We're talking about the women involved. You know, it takes time to develop a case and file a case, because you just don't go file a case without some proof. And we're getting proof. We're getting things.
With Moore showing no signs of backing out of the race, President Trump broke his silence yesterday.
I can tell you one thing for sure. We don't need a liberal person in there, a Democrat, Jones.
This was Jones's response.
I feel like my record speaks for itself, and I don't have to have the president or anyone else to talk about it or try to label it.
Today on social media, the Jones campaign debuted a new ad featuring early photos of Moore's accusers.
Now they are women, witnesses to us all of his disturbing conduct. Will we make their abuser a U.S. Senator?
The Moore campaign confirms its communications director, John Rogers, has stepped down. Now, earlier in the day, an advisor with the campaign told Fox News Rogers simply lacked the experience to deal with all the press over the past couple weeks. But then later, the campaign issued a statement quoting its chairman, Bill Armistead, saying, John made the decision to leave the campaign last Friday. Any representations to the contrary are false. In Birmingham, Alabama, Jonathan Seri, Fox News.
And President Trump is spending his Thanksgiving weekend at Mar-a-Lago in what he calls the Winter White House. No public appearances on the schedule. President Trump spent time working the phones, lobbying lawmakers on tax reform as well. Fox News correspondent Phil Keating is in West Palm Beach with our report.
Welcomed by supporters and holiday well-wishers last night. Hello, everybody. President Trump and family arrived in West Palm Beach for the long Thanksgiving weekend, which the White House press office says will be more governing, less golfing. And before sunrise, the president began tweeting from his Mar-a-Lago resort, a.k.a. the Winter White House, getting right back into his back and forth with the father of one of the 3 UCLA basketball players arrested in China for shoplifting. Quote, it wasn't the White House, it wasn't the State Department, it wasn't Father LeVar, so-called people on the ground in China that got his son out of a long-term prison sentence. It was me. Too bad, LeVar is just a poor man's version of Don King, but without the hair. Just think. Trump then revisited the NFL national anthem controversy, aiming this time not at the kneeling players, but the league itself. The NFL is now thinking about a new idea, keeping teams in the locker room during the national anthem next season. That's almost as bad as kneeling. When will the highly paid commissioner finally get tough and smart? This issue is killing your league. President Trump spent most of the morning at his Trump International Golf Club after tweeting that while in Florida this week, he'll be having meetings and working the phones, encouraging senators to pass its version of the tax cut and tax reform bill, which is already passed in the House. Signing that package into law would fulfill a major campaign promise.
Great to meet you. Thanks for your service.
Back in D.C., Vice President Mike Pence and Second Lady Karen visited with wounded warriors recovering at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center and the USO Warrior and Family Center, where nearly all of the service members had amputations or prosthetics.
Thank you for your service. The caregivers gathered here. You give your best to America's best. And we're all grateful to you and thankful for you. Happy Thanksgiving.
The White House has nothing public scheduled here all long holiday weekend, but next week in D.C. it's back to serious work, and we have confirmed that on Tuesday, President Trump will meet with the Big Four congressional leadership. That is Schumer, Pelosi, McConnell, and Ryan, in an effort to avert a government shutdown next month. That will require Congress to pass a long-term or more likely short-term budget extension by December 8th. Lou?
Phil, thank you very much. Phil Keating. We're coming right back. There's a lot more ahead. Please stay with us. An FBI informant to shed light on the Uranium One scandal and the never-ending web of Clinton corruption. Will the Justice Department stop ignoring the clear evidence and appoint a second special counsel to investigate that corruption? We take it all up with Judicial Watch's Chris Farrell. And the disgraceful dishonesty of Uber management They hid a massive data breach for more than a year. Uber officials even paid off hackers to cover up the breach that exposed the data of 57 million people. We'll have that report and much more here next. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Special counsel Robert Mueller continues to move further and further away from the original scope of his investigation. Mueller is now apparently looking into White House senior advisor Jared Kushner's conversations with foreign leaders during the period of the transition, and Kushner's role in talks about a UN resolution condemning Israeli settlements. Joining me now, Chris Farrell. He's Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch. And as the saying goes, Chris, we have a lot of ground to cover tonight.
Indeed.
Let's start with Mueller. This is becoming one of the most exasperating events in recent presidential history.
It is.
And what now is he doing with Jared Kushner?
He's attempting to criminalize the conversations and contacts, communications of one of the president's not only relatives, certainly a close
his son-in-law
advisor, and somehow take his communications, his contacts and conversations and criminalize them. And arguably there's two ways to say that that's nonsense. Number one, he was a private person outside of government service, and that pesky little First Amendment still exists, and he's free to talk to whomever he wishes. But if you want to apply it in the context of the presidency, who's to say that he was not acting at the direction or as an agent of the president in talking to other foreign leaders about possible initiatives or policy ideas? He's entirely free to do so as a member of the president's inner circle. So I'm not really sure. I mean, this is overreach of overreach. This is beyond the pale.
It's also
I thought this was all Russia.
Very irritating.
Yeah.
It is irritating on so many levels. One, it's beyond the purview of his mission.
Correct.
Secondly, it is beyond the pale when it comes to a special counsel who is now adventuring into areas looking for almost any straw that he might grasp in order to say that he should continue an investigation that has been absolutely barren, sterile, and unproductive. And then, to add to that dimension, the obvious intent on the part not only of the deep state, but the leadership of the Republican Party that controls both houses of Congress to permit this overreach to go on. Because we, as I understand it, we have a majority leader in the Senate and a speaker in the House who, along with the heads of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees and the Judiciary Committees, could say, Mueller, you know what, we've had a belly full, and either you present a reason to continue this, or we're drawing it up and saying good night.
And a majority of that leadership, let's just say hypothetically, that the committee chairmen were all sort of in agreement on this, and I know that they're not, but just hypothetically, they could then turn to the so-called leadership, Ryan and McConnell, and say, look, we're going to come out publicly and say that this is nonsense. Either get on board or get out of the way. But there's just this complete failure in leadership. McConnell, Ryan, Burr, the entire cast of characters.
Burr, my God, the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee has
disgraceful.
I'm sorry?
It's disgraceful what he's done.
He has absolutely abdicated his responsibilities, his authority, and turned over one of the most important committees in the United States Senate to the ranking member. He is utterly bereft of any integrity to have conducted himself as he has.
And Warner is busy using the committee to gin up his 2020 campaign. So, and Burr is complicit in that, unfortunately.
And now let's turn to the Justice Department as we find it. Leaderless, rudderless, and conflicted. What are we to do? What is the president to do?
Well, you have a case now where Mueller is issuing subpoenas to his very own Justice Department to compel them to produce records to him. And let's think about this for a second. A subpoena is a coercive legal instrument. It's not a request. It's not coordination. It's not a lot of things. It is a demand with teeth in it. And so ask yourself, what in the world is going on where Mueller is issuing subpoenas to the Justice Department to compel production of records? Is the Justice Department not cooperating? Is that the message? What is he not getting that he wants? And why would there be resistance over it? We are going off into Never Never Land. This is a level of weirdness with respect to Mueller that it defies description.
Meanwhile, it appears there's only one serious person in Washington, D.C., and that is the President of the United States, who is charged with responsibility for our foreign policy, for making certain our national security is as effective as it can be, and he is being blocked, challenged, obstructed at every turn by not only the Democrats, who are playing a horrible and petty and dangerous game of obstructionism, but by the leaders of his own party.
And to his credit, he continues to march along and pursue his objectives despite all the sniping and, frankly, the cowardice on the part of the so-called leadership. He continues to move forward and try to get things accomplished. Also realize...
And he is accomplishing. We should point out, he is accomplishing great things, but he is doing so with an expenditure of energy that is twice, thrice what is would be customarily necessary.
Can you imagine if members of his own party actually supported them?
Can you imagine what would happen if the national left-wing media had any kind of fairness or a sense of balance and responsibility to the public's right to know the truth, what he could accomplish? My God.
It's just a question of intellectual honesty, and unfortunately it's entirely absent. And a great example of that is this Fusion GPS nonsense, where these guys who are, so-called ex-journalists were out essentially buying and placing phonied up stories that they had manufactured. And so the corrosive effect on the public's respect or trust in the media, is further driven into the gutter.
I want to do something, if I may, and I apologize for interrupting, but we're well over.
Sure.
But in talking with Peter Schweizer, the author, as you know, of Clinton Cash,
great guy, yep.
One of the most successful and productive and important investigative reporters that involved in any of this, is setting much of it in motion, in fact.
Absolutely.
Last week I asked him, are the following people dirty? Are the following people crooked? I'm going to ask you, if I may, the same question. Is Jeff Sessions crooked?
I don't believe so, no. I think he's a man of integrity. I just think he's been overwhelmed and neutralized by the Justice Department deep state.
Robert Mueller.
I have reason to suspect and question his integrity and also his honesty, particularly in light of the events and activities going all the way back to Uranium One, 2009 and thereafter.
James Comey.
He's a man who absconded with the United States government records and willfully leaked them. He's a criminal, in my opinion.
Andrew McCabe.
Another man who's wildly conflicted, and there's sufficient evidence, particularly based on Judicial Watch records we obtained through the Freedom of Information Act in our litigation. We just got 79 pages, more new pages, just in the last day with respect to Mr. McCabe. He's wildly conflicted, and his wife was a political operative, an ally of McAuliffe.
And Andrew Weissman as well.
Yeah, this is the same situation or same scenario that we're involved in. And, I'm happy to answer those straight-up questions that way because probably myself and maybe 2 or 3 other people would give you single-sentence answers.
Well, you and Peter Schweizer couldn't...
Peter Schweizer, absolutely.
He couldn't find it in his heart and his demand for truth to suggest that any of them should be giving a clear bill of integrity, and that's astonishing. I thank you for those straightforward answers, and you being one of those few people is the reason I took the time for our viewers to hear you respond. It is a crisis that we face, and there is no further denying it. We have a crisis of confidence. We have a crisis in a politicized Justice Department, and we have a country that is bleeding right now, and we have a responsibility as citizens to make certain that we get this corrected straight away. Do you concur?
I do. We have got to go back to equal justice under the law, and anything short of that destroys our constitutional republic.
Chris Farrell, always good to have you here. Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving, Lou.
Happy Thanksgiving. Breaking news now, the Border Patrol finally going public with some statements today, letting us know that one of the agents seriously wounded in Southwest Texas Sunday has been discharged from the hospital. The Border Patrol, however, will not identify that agent, and the Border Patrol refuses to divulge the circumstances that led to his partner's death, presumably his murder. The only thing that the FBI will say, and yes, the FBI is investigating, and again, we appear to have the truth in the hands of what is quickly becoming a national police force, that is the FBI, the way its top officials are managing it now. They are investigating the incident as an assault. On Wall Street today, stocks closed mixed. The Dow falling 65 points, the S&P down 2, the Nasdaq up 5, closing at a record high. Volume on the big board, light trading 2.7 billion shares. Attorneys general in Connecticut and New York now say they are investigating the Uber cyber breach affecting 57 million customers and drivers. Uber refused to disclose that hack for more than a year. A reminder to listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. We're coming right back. Joining us tonight, Gordon Chang, an expert on China and North Korea, author of the book, The Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, good to have you with us. The president announcing more sanctions, adding to those that have already been in place now, some of them for decades. Any likelihood that they will be any more effective than sanctions before them?
I think over the long term they will be. There is some anecdotal evidence pointing all in the same direction, that the North Koreans are getting starved of cash. So, for instance, junior officials in Pyongyang who are part of the favored class are no longer getting their rations from their special distribution channel. Secretary Tillerson on Monday talked about fuel shortages. Also, these loyalty payments, which are essentially informal taxes, the regime is accelerating their collection, meaning that they've got a cash flow problem. So,
but this is not the first time that the if you will, the apparatchik, the ruling class has been pressed and, in fact, in some cases moved to subsistence in the way of food and other staples. So where are we headed then? Because it is just, we are now in the 10th month of the presidency of Donald J. Trump, and it's starting to feel a lot like all that have preceded it.
Yeah, well,
when it comes to North Korea.
Yeah, he's actually much more effective on this because he's made it his #1 foreign policy goal. You know, no longer are we talking about
but I would only argue with the word effective. At this point, we don't have an effect because the effect that the president has said he wants to achieve, that is the denuclearization of Korea. And in no way am I criticizing him for that laudatory goal, which 3 presidents before him have made necessary. I am, however, wondering about how effective will be the turn to China to bring pressure on Kim Jong-un and to resolve it, because you and I both know, and America, I think, now knows, that the only possible solution goes through Beijing.
Well, it does. And, you know, we have seen President Trump start to signal to the Chinese that he is not going to put up with the old way of doing things. You know,
and he's the only president to do so amongst the last 3.
Right. And the reason is, or part of the reason is that...
But I don't care. I'm sorry. We're crushed for time. I know the reasons. We know the reasons. The reason is we want to denuclearize North Korea. My question is, what's it going to take? And when will it happen? Because the South Koreans say that the North Koreans will have an ICBM capable of hitting the United States by the end of this year with a nuclear warhead aboard.
Yeah, and they're probably right. You know, the estimates are 9 months, maybe 15 months, but they may be able to do it a lot sooner. We just don't know. But it's pretty soon.
by the end of this year.
Yeah.
And our intelligence keeps getting updated into agreement with that of South Korea.
Right. I mean, we've been far too optimistic in the past. You know, President Trump needs to put the hard word on Beijing, and he needs to impose costs that make China at a point where they have no choice but to comply. If he takes one of those big Chinese banks and declares them a primary money laundering concern, disconnects them from the global financial system, then we're going to see Beijing move. But President Trump needs to show the will to do that, because that's going to cost a lot.
It's going to cost a lot. I think that if he doesn't, the cost will be
even greater,
unspeakably higher. Thank you so much, Gordon. Appreciate it. Gordon Chang.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Even in the midst of all that we must discuss, we're coming right back with much more. Stay with us, and yes, there is much to be grateful for. We'll take that up as well. Stay with us. President Trump blasting the NFL once again. This time over reports the NFL may keep players in the locker room next year during our national anthem. When will this disgrace and insult stop? We take it up with conservative commentator and best-selling author Michelle Malkin. And criminals beware. Nitro, the police dog, is going above and beyond the call of duty. Wait till you see this. We'll have the video for you here next. Stay with us. We'll be right back. This just in, newly released court documents reveal the gruesome tactics of the MS-13 drug cartel in Montgomery County, Maryland. As many as 10 members of the MS-13 gang stabbed a man who is unidentified, stabbed him more than 100 times, and ripped out his heart before burying him. So far, one person has been arrested and charged in the gruesome murder. Well, joining me now, Michelle Malkin, host of Michelle Malkin Investigates on CRTV.com, best-selling author and great American. Michelle, great to see you. And let's turn, if we may, very quickly to a situation with MS-13. The Attorney General, to his credit, has been focused on it. The President called them out himself. But they are now a crisis in every community in which they operate.
They certainly have become that. They've metastasized over the last 20, 25 years since I started covering illegal alien gangs like them back into my days of newspapering in Los Angeles. And I lived in Montgomery County, Maryland, and it is not shocking because even when I left some 10 years ago, MS-13 had penetrated so deeply into the public school system, the welfare system, and now the fact that you have this man who was targeted by MS-13 allegedly and buried in a park that families like mine have been going to on weekends, Wheaton Regional Park. It shows you that the deadly consequences of open borders are now at the doorstep of the Beltway and the White House.
And the Border Patrol, violence against agents has risen 60% just this year alone. One agent murdered Sunday. We don't know the details. We are, for the first time, not being told details. They will not even identify his partner, the agent who was with him during the presumed assault and murder, nor how they came into contact with whomever it was. Things are taking a very decided turn for the worse.
Yes, they are, Lou, and it is alarming, but it will not be a shock to many rank-and-file Border Patrol agents who have had to encounter the swamp and the way that it handles crises like this. Just 5 years ago, Nicholas Ivey, who was a Border Patrol agent who died in similar circumstances. He had been checking a ground sensor and assessing whether or not it was human activity. Just a tragedy of errors occurred that resulted in him dying under friendly fire. But there's still a lot of questions, even up to this past summer, because you have ranchers and locals where he had died wondering if, in fact, there was a cover-up related to drug smuggling activity. And in Agent Martinez's case over the weekend, the idea that he simply fell into a culvert at 11:20 p.m. on a Saturday in a remote area, also known to to be infested by drug smugglers. It doesn't make sense, Lou, and it doesn't smell good. And the Department of Homeland Security, whether it's run by Republicans or Democrats, has a problem with telling the truth. And it's going to take independent watchdogs to elicit answers from them. I also covered the case of Victor Avila, who you will remember, Lou, the ICE agent who was also ambushed in Mexico with another agent, Jaime Zapata, who died. And they are still having to go to federal court. In fact, our friends at Judicial Watch have helped them out trying to file FOIA lawsuits because you have the government at every turn refusing to answer questions about what happened because they don't want to take accountability.
Our government, our federal government, is becoming almost unrecognizable in too many instances, and it's got to be fixed. This administration has to fix it and bring them to heel, because this is a bureaucracy out of control. We might as well be living in Europe to see the responsiveness of these agencies and departments to the murder of public servants and those who are defending literally the nation's sovereignty at the first line, and that is the border. Michelle, great to see you. Thanks so much for being with us. Michelle Malkin.
Thank you. Grateful for you, Thanksgiving. Thanks.
I absolutely love that. Up next, new allegations against Democratic Senator Al Franken. That's right. There are more women. We take up the ever-growing list of mostly leftist creeps with Charlie Hurt. Here next. Stay with us. Breaking news now. Two more women have just come forward tonight. They accuse Senator Al Franken of inappropriate touching. Both women speaking on condition of anonymity to the Huffington Post. They claim Franken groped their posteriors in separate incidents during Franken's first campaign for the Senate back in 2007. This makes now a total of 4 women who've made similar allegations against Franken over the past week. Joining me now, Washington Times opinion editor, Fox Business contributor Charlie Hurt. This may be, it seems for the left at least, and some part of the right, the new normal. Charlie, what do you think?
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, these people are dropping like flies. They're coming out of the woodwork like cockroaches. But, you know, I thought it was particularly interesting because this latest report about Al Franken came out of Huffington Post, which, of course, is the website that was started by Al Franken's great friend and now defender, Arianna Huffington, right, who had all those embarrassing pictures of him groping her, but she seemed to think it was just fine and rather enjoyed it, apparently.
Well, she said that there was nothing inappropriate that ever happened, despite appearances, I guess is the way to say that. Senator Conyers of Michigan, Congressman Conyers of Michigan, more women stepping forward again. He says he will not, no matter what, resign. Your reaction?
And I mean, with Conyers, you're talking about a guy who is the most powerful Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. This is the committee that oversees justice in this country. And the idea that this kind of guy, and you know, there's a new report out just today, Melanie Sloan, who is an attorney, certainly not a right-winger by any stretch. If anything, she's a left-winger, but a powerful attorney who is a ethics watchdog here in the city. Her whole life she's been going after powerful people. She came out today in the Washington Post and accused Conyers of assaulting her and abusing her when she worked for him years ago, and that she alerted Dick Gephardt at the time to this abuse, and nothing was ever done about it. It was all swept under the carpet. I think that as many of these things as we've seen so far, Lou, I think we haven't seen the end. I think we're still going to see a lot more, and there are a lot more questions that need to be, uncomfortable questions that need to be asked of people.
The outrage of these molestations, these sexual harassment and abuses carried out by senators, by congressmen, the existence of a slush fund to hide them is almost incomprehensible.